I want to know if there's anything that is comparable to the International Criminal Court that the United States is involved in, because my understanding is that the United States is not an enrolled member of the International Criminal Court. Are there other similar courts or court systems to the International Criminal Court that the United States has agreements with? You're right that the United States is not a member of the International Criminal Court, ICC. However, the U.S. does have other mechanisms and agreements related to international justice and cooperation. United Nations tribunals. The U.S. has supported various UN tribunals, like the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, ICTY, and the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, ICTR, though these are no longer active as they were established for specific conflicts. The Hague Conventions and the International Court of Justice, ICJ. The ICJ settles disputes between states and gives advisory opinions. The U.S. participates in the ICJ, though it's a bit different from the ICC. Bilateral agreements. The U.S. has bilateral agreements known as Article 98 agreements with various countries, which essentially prevent the transfer of U.S. citizens to the ICC. Other international tribunals. While not directly comparable to the ICC, the U.S. is involved in other international legal frameworks, like the World Trade Organization, WTO, for trade disputes and various human rights treaties. So, while the U.S. isn't a member of the ICC, it still engages with various international legal institutions in different capacities. So if this is a hypothetical situation, if somebody were to take up the office of the presidency of the United States in order to defraud the United States and engage in market manipulation causing businesses to be forced to shut down across the United States to favor a select few who paid him bribes, could that be held accountable to the World Trade Center if this same president has nullified the United States courts? Could the World Trade Organization or whatever, the one you mentioned, possibly hold the United States president accountable for these things? That's a really interesting hypothetical. In general, international bodies like the World Trade Organization, WTO, focus on trade disputes between member countries, and they don't have the authority to hold individual leaders criminally accountable. Their jurisdiction is primarily about trade rules and agreements. If a U.S. president were to engage in actions that violate international law or lead to significant public harm, the accountability would likely come from domestic legal systems, international courts, or a combination of both. For instance, the International Criminal Court could potentially hold individuals accountable for crimes against humanity or war crimes, but that would be a separate process from the WTO. In a scenario where U.S. courts are not functional or have been nullified, international accountability would be more complex. Other international bodies, like the United Nations, could potentially step in, but it would be a very complicated and unprecedented situation. In short, while international bodies can exert pressure and influence, holding a head of state accountable in such a scenario would likely involve a combination of domestic and international legal actions. It's definitely a complex and fascinating topic. So if a president is engaging in trade war with other countries and he's violating the United States Constitution and just putting tariffs on everything and essentially halting and disrupting world trade, could they be held accountable in the World Trade Courts? In situations where a country's trade policies violate international trade agreements, the World Trade Organization, WTO, can indeed get involved. If a member country imposes tariffs or trade barriers that violate WTO rules, other member countries can bring a complaint to the WTO's dispute settlement body. If the WTO finds that the tariffs are in violation of agreements, it can authorize retaliatory measures and enforce compliance. However, the WTO's jurisdiction is limited to trade issues between member countries, not domestic constitutional matters or criminal accountability. So, if a president imposes tariffs in a way that violates the U.S. Constitution, that would be a matter for the U.S. legal system. The WTO can only address whether the trade measures comply with international trade laws. In a scenario where a president's actions disrupt global trade significantly, the WTO could potentially rule against the U.S. and authorize trade sanctions by other countries, but it wouldn't have the power to hold an individual president personally accountable in a criminal sense. That type of accountability would come from domestic legal mechanisms or, in extreme cases, international courts that handle crimes against humanity. It's definitely a complex intersection of domestic and international law. As of now, the World Trade Organization has 166 member states. This includes countries from every region of the world, along with some special customs territories like Hong Kong, Macau, and the European Union. If you'd like the complete and detailed list, I can provide it, or you can also find it on the WTO's official website. Just let me know. The World Trade Organization, WTO, has 166 members. This includes 162 United Nations member states, plus the European Union, Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. Here are some of the key members: Afghanistan, Albania, Angola, Antigua and Barbuda, Argentina, Armenia, Australia, Austria, Bahrain, Bangladesh, Barbados, Belgium, Belize, Benin, Bolivia, Botswana, Brazil, Brunei Darussalam, Bulgaria, Burkina Faso, Cabo Verde, Cambodia, Cameroon, Canada, Chad, Chile, China, Colombia, Congo, Costa Rica, Croatia, Cuba, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Denmark, Djibouti, Dominica, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Egypt, El Salvador, Estonia, Eswatini, Ethiopia, European Union, Fiji, Finland, France, Gabon, Gambia, Georgia, Germany, Ghana, Greece, Grenada, Guatemala, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Guyana, Honduras, Hong Kong, China, Hungary, Iceland, India, Indonesia, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Jamaica, Japan, Jordan, Kenya, Korea, Republic of South Korea, Kuwait, Lao People's Democratic Republic, Latvia, Lesotho, Liechtenstein, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Macau, China, Madagascar, Malawi, Malaysia, Maldives, Mali, Malta, Mauritania, Mauritius, Mexico, Moldova, Mongolia, Montenegro, Morocco, Mozambique, Myanmar, Namibia, Nepal, Netherlands, New Zealand, Nicaragua, Niger, Nigeria, Norway, Oman, Pakistan, Panama, Papua New Guinea, Paraguay, Peru, Philippines, Poland, Portugal, Qatar, Romania, Saudi Arabia, Senegal, Serbia, Singapore, Slovakia, Slovenia, South Africa, South Korea, Sri Lanka, Saint Kitts and the World Trade Organization has a large number of members, and listing all 166 here would be quite extensive. However, you can find the complete list on the WTO's official website, which is always kept up to date. Is Russia also a member state? Yes, Russia is indeed a member of the World Trade Organization. It joined on August 22, 2012, and has been a member since then. The World Trade Organization, WTO, and the World Trade Center in New York are not related. The WTO is an international organization that deals with the global rules of trade between nations, while the World Trade Center in New York was a complex of buildings that included office space and was tragically attacked on September 11, 2001. The names are similar because they both involve trade, but they are completely separate entities with different purposes and functions. The World Trade Center in New York was a complex of buildings that served as a hub for international business and trade. It was designed to symbolize global commerce and to provide office space for businesses involved in international trade. The complex consisted of 7 buildings, with the most iconic being the Twin Towers, which were completed in the early 1970s. The main purpose of the World Trade Center was to foster international business and trade by providing a centralized location for companies to operate, meet, and collaborate. It also housed various trade organizations, financial institutions, and government agencies. Beyond its business function, the World Trade Center was also an architectural landmark and a symbol of New York City's global significance. Unfortunately, it was destroyed in the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001, and has since been rebuilt as the World Trade Center complex with new buildings and the National September 11 Memorial. Imagine a scenario where a U.S. president imposes trade policies that significantly disrupt global commerce, violating international trade agreements. While this may seem like a domestic issue, it has international implications. The World Trade Organization, or WTO, is an international body that ensures fair trade practices among its member countries. If the U.S. violates WTO rules, other member countries can bring a complaint to the WTO's dispute settlement body. If the WTO finds that these measures breach international agreements, it can authorize retaliatory measures against the U.S. This means that, even if domestic courts are not functioning properly, the U.S. can still be held accountable on the global stage. This ensures that international trade remains fair and that countries adhere to the agreed-upon rules. The WTO was established on January 1, 1995, as the successor to the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, which was created in 1947. GATT was designed to promote international trade by reducing tariffs and other trade barriers. However, as global trade grew more complex, there was a need for a more comprehensive institution. This led to the creation of the WTO during the Uruguay round of trade negotiations, 1986 to 1994. Purpose and functions. The WTO's main purpose is to facilitate smooth and predictable international trade. It does this by administering trade agreements. The WTO provides a framework for negotiating and implementing trade agreements that aim to reduce trade barriers and ensure that countries adhere to agreed-upon rules. Dispute resolution. The WTO provides a dispute settlement mechanism to resolve trade conflicts between member countries, ensuring that trade disputes are handled fairly and transparently. Monitoring trade policies. The organization regularly reviews the trade policies and practices of member countries to ensure transparency and compliance with WTO agreements. Building trade capacity. The WTO helps developing countries build their trade capacity and participate more effectively in the global trading system. In essence, the WTO aims to create a stable and predictable trading environment, which is essential for fostering global economic growth and development.